Welcome to the Policy and Curriculum meeting. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd at 6:05 p.m. Aaron, go ahead.
Why don't we do introductions, start with members of the committee that are here, and then we'll introduce others. So committee chair, if you want to introduce yourself, and then.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nyla Biliu, and I am an at-large board member, and I go by she, her, they. Okay, perfect. Are you able to bring? Okay. Mickey, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Mickey Bondo, the District 1 rep and also the vice chair of the school board and a member of the Policy and Curriculum Committee.
I'm Julie Opperman, District 3 rep and a member of the committee.
Hi, my name is Yusra Ali. I'm at-large member and a member of the Policy and Curriculum Committee.
Okay. Chair Lentz, you want to?
Yes, Sarah Lentz, she, hers, chair of the board, not actually on this committee, but just here.
Right. And Tim, our PEA rep, do you want to?
Yep, my name's Tim Mason-Osan. I'm in the third year working for Portland Schools. I'm at King. I'm a non-voting member on behalf of the PEA.
Right. And I'm Aaron Townsend, Deputy Superintendent, staff member for the Policy and Curriculum Committee, and excited that Jesse Applegate's joining us tonight. So Jesse, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Jesse Applegate. I'm the Director for Student Support Services for Portland.
Right. So we have kind of two policies up for kind of review. So tonight's topic is kind of related to aspects of special education, certainly not the whole thing, but some of the kind of initial pieces. And so these two policies, when we did our review, were flagged as needing to have some updates based on some legislative changes that happened. So the first that we'll look at in just a moment is kind of about our child find policy. So we'll talk about the proposed changes to that, and then have a little bit of discussion about just kind of our practice as it relates to child find. And then the second policy and the related procedure is related to kind of referral to special education and speaks some to general education intervention, systems. So we'll again do the same thing, talk about the proposed revisions to the policies there, and then add a little context around kind of what some of the referral processes are and what that looks like, and some of the elements around that. So that's kind of our agenda for this evening. So we'll get started. So I'm going to start by, we have a little slide deck that I added earlier today just at the top of the board docs agenda, but just to help guide the conversation. All right. So yeah, our hope is to approve these revisions here at the committee level tonight and forward them on to the board to have these policies formally updated. So our first one that we're going to look at is the policy related, to child find, or it's the child find policy. So one of the kind of required policies that we have and was in need of some legislative update. So first, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but just wanted to make sure people understood what that frame was about child find, kind of what our responsibility is. So kind of legislatively, we have an obligation, to kind of look for, identify, screen for students who may be in need of special education services. So, and as you see in some of the language of the policy, this is not a determinant, but it's ones that may need support for, through special education to be able to access what we call free and appropriate public education, or FAPE in the kind of in the lingo of special education. So, That's an obligation that all school units have, and it exists, for kind of all students within our jurisdiction and has a time element to it. So we'll talk in just a minute. I'll do a little bit of high level, and then Jesse can share a little bit about some of how our screening practices help us to accomplish, kind of this responsibility. But in respect to the policy, and we can look at it a little more closely if, members are interested. But really the legislative update that's relevant in this policy, and then as well, in the other set of policies that we'll look at, was the legislation that passed now a couple years ago. I don't know, Jesse, I forget exactly the year now off the top of my head, but that extended the requirement to continue to provide special education services through age 22. So previously that had just been through age 20 and has been extended. So, we needed to update it to kind of conform to the current kind of legislative requirements. And then we had a few other, while we were diving into it, a few other kind of language revisions with the goal of trying to improve clarity and kind of alignment with some of our other policies. So in some places you'll see trying to use some consistent language in both this policy and the other as it relates to, referrals to special education and so forth. So that's the main update on the policy. Before we get into, let's talk a little bit about pre-K and K screening, and then we can kind of open it up for questions about either the policy or just some of our practices around screening. So I'll just say briefly, the primary way that we, kind of accomplish our child find responsibilities, because the vast majority of our enrollments, though not all, come for students who are coming in now through pre-K, as well as traditionally through kindergarten. So the screening practices that we have there, and I have, added a few artifacts that talk about it a little bit to board docs, are our primary mechanism to kind of identify students who may be in need of special education services. So we have, through the intake process, both for English only students, as well as in partnership with the intake processes and multilingual, have a set of screening tools that are used that help us make these determinations. I mean, they gather information more globally, but one of the things that it helps accomplish for us are these kind of child find responsibilities. And that's part of why there's been, historically, has been the delay by a couple of days in terms of the start date for pre-K and K, is to ensure we're able to screen as many students as possible. And in general, we're at near 100%, right? Before the start of school, so that, if there is a consideration of potential need, we can initiate, the kind of referral process and, the assessments, which we'll talk about the referral process in the next policy. So Jesse, I don't know if you want to share any more, what you'd add about, kind of the pre-K and K screening practices as it relates to kind of child find.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to add, and I mean, Aaron, you spoke to this a bit, but just to clarify again that, our responsibility is to identify these students, as we're going to get to in a bit. The referral the sort of evaluation process is a process. So this screening that we do is really sort of the first step in that process, right? It's looking to identify students where there might be a need, and then based on the outcome of that, and you can see this reflected in one of the other documents we shared, is the guidance document to schools on this screening process. But the process is really intended to just identify students if there might be a need for additional follow-up of some kind, whether that's additional support, like through the RTI process, or whether that's even just sort of monitoring. So again, it's a first step, but we do it within the first 30 days. We actually, you should know, we do a lot of it in the spring. We're actually about to start doing it right now for any students that we're aware of who are coming into kindergarten. But we then have that time in the fall as well to complete any other screenings that we need to do. And that's again, that first step. Doesn't mean a student will end up with an IEP or getting services. It and because we're obligated to look at every student, but it's just to make sure we're not missing anything, and that we're taking that first step if we need to move toward identification. And I don't know if there was any other pieces that you wanted me to speak to on that, but I think that's kind of the summary of it.
Yeah. And just the other thing I'll, name is, that obviously the vast majority of our students are enrolling, through pre-K and K, but obviously students enter the system at other points, right, in their educational journey. And we don't have the same, there are some specific tools that we use in the pre-K and K screening that give information beyond what's required for child find, but just as part of kind of understanding the students, who the student is, right, to help, kind of the early childhood educators. But, we do have kind of practices both in multilingual intake and in the online enrollment that screen for, has your student ever had services? Are there, have they ever had an IEP before, to try and surface some of that information if students are entering at a different point in their journey, in their educational kind of career. So the screening tools are much more directed towards the early childhood space, but, we're conscious of, as students enter into that other space, whether there's any indication that there may be, or whether they've had any history of kind of assessment or whatnot. And those things, if they're coming from within the United States, and obviously, we have an important population that's not, but those things should be documented in their folders and CUME folders and so forth, if they've ever been, referred for assessment and things like that. So, with our other students in this, we'll talk a little bit more about it, because certainly over the past few years, we've gotten much better and clearer about guidance around, kind of considering the dual, or the considerations around students who may potentially be dually identified in terms of language needs, or whether it's disability. So we've developed a bunch of tools around guiding that process. That's really more in the referral space, but, it's relevant as we have students enrolling and we're trying to assess what are their needs. It's certainly a complicated picture, particularly for many of our, kind of older adolescent students, or even, fourth, fifth grade and above, who may have had interrupted, formal education. So it's often maybe not necessarily immediately apparent, and we're trying to utilize some of the guidance and, what we've learned organizationally over the past few years to try and make the distinctions about what are the support students need to be successful. So I think, that's about it. I think for presentation, I'd say let's, Julianne, I see you have your hand up. Let's take questions just kind of generally, and then we can kind of come back at the end to just confirm policy language, and, take action on that if that's appropriate. So, Julianne?
Thank you. My question, I looked over the policy, but my question is, it says age 5 or entering, but do we do anything such as we recognize a student as like 2 years old or 3 years old, some of the CDC stuff, do we do any of that?
Great. Yeah, that's the CDS. And I'll, Jesse, I think you'll be able to
talk about it, then you can talk about it later.
No, actually, I was thinking we should, just because it's been so in the news, I was thinking actually we should touch on this, and this may change. We may have to bring this back to at the point. I mean, certainly we're on this trajectory to assume that responsibility. So CDS, Child Development Services, is the statewide kind of provider that is responsible for child find for all students birth up until age 5 in public school enrollment. So we are not responsible for that currently. Maine, as you may have heard in the discourse about it, is somewhat of an outlier in terms of states around that, right, that structure. So the change that the commissioner has recommended is for school districts over the next couple of years, and this is, I think it's still still with the legislature. It hasn't been fully resolved, but to transition that responsibility to local school units over the next couple of years. So if that happens, we would be, and it's called CDS Part B, that we would become responsible for, and it's for 3, 4, and 5 year olds, 3 and 4 year olds. Yes, 3 and 4 year olds, because we're already responsible for 5. So we would become responsible for that, and that's a complicated set of things that we'll need to work through once that gets finalized. But currently, because of the CDS structure, we are responsible for just ages 5 and above, but that could change. So I don't know, Jesse, what else would you add?
Well, I just wanted to clarify, because it's an important distinction, too, that although we're not responsible for FAPE right now for those 3 and 4-year-olds, we do a similar screening to what we just described for those students who apply, to be in our programs. And the idea is that since they're coming to our programs, we do the screening so that we can, if there is a need for support or monitoring, that we can do that, and we can potentially refer to CDS if we need to. So just want to clarify that we do that, although we don't have the actual FAPE responsibility.
If I may, do we provide the service? Or if there's screening, do we provide services, or do we recommend them and direct them to somewhere else?
Right. So if we felt that a student should be referred to special education, we would do that through CDS. And if the student was eligible, we have the services are provided to them in a variety of ways, including in our programs sometimes by our staff. Yes, but that's all through an arrangement with CDS.
Yep, we've had an MOU with CDS for the past couple of years for whereby we are hiring and providing the services for students enrolled in our program. So not for all 3 and 4-year-olds, and it's only for us. Thus, it's only 4-year-olds because we only have programs for 4-year-olds. But for anybody in our that's enrolled in PPS pre-K, but we're reimbursed by CDS. So we do not pay for those services, but we do the hiring and so forth, in part because of the limits in bandwidth and capacity. Like, kids were not getting access to it. So this has been, some of the motto of why the transition, right? This was the first kind of MOU agreement around it for pre-K with CDS to kind of relieve some of those issues. Ms. Bonda?
Thank you. I just need, we're talking about the CDS. I tried, when we do the referral to the CDS program and support, do we have any follow-up after that? Because the student's supposed to come back to us for education. So how we do that transition? Or CDS, we just refer, and then that's it. So just try to understand the process. When we refer, do we have a follow-up? Do we have some result coming? And then after that, the student is coming back to us to continue, or so what's really happened?
Jesse, do you want to speak to that? Maybe, I think it looks a little different whether a student was enrolled with us, right?
Yes.
For those that are enrolled with us, we're managing it and we facilitate, all the transition and that information. But when a student's not enrolled in a PPS pre-K, maybe speak to a little bit about what we would only make a referral, right, for students who are in our pre-K programs. Right.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not in our pre-K programs, we're not in a position to make a referral at all. But
yeah, hold on a second. If they are not in our pre-K program, but we're still screening, right? We are screening
only students
not for
that
4-year-olds.
apply.
Okay.
CDS, that is their responsibility to be doing.
That's their responsibility.
The broader right now. Now, if we become responsible for FAPE in the future, which as Eric spoke to, is moving in that direction, then we would do the screening for everyone. But we don't.
For everyone.
That's not our obligation.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
And one just additional piece, Mickey, we do just a small, even slighter clarification is because we do the pre-K screening just to initiate the process following the application period. So even if a student maybe doesn't enroll with us, ultimately doesn't get a seat because of the lottery or something like that, we have actually screened them at the beginning of that period before the assignments are made. So that, like, the pre-K screening process for those that applied, in the lottery, which was open in January, has already happened for the students who will be enrolling in pre-K next year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Chair Lentz. You're muted, Chair.
I thought I clicked it. Sorry. Last night we were talking about general ed services until students are 20. Does that go up as well, or so special ed services is longer than general ed?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yeah, Jesse, do you want to speak to that? And I forget what exactly.
That seems complicated.
It is a bit complicated. I mean, and just for a really brief context, Maine for a long time was one of the only states where special ed services didn't go up to 22. So the DOE a couple years ago directed us to do that, and then there was a law passed, to Aaron's point, that now requires it. It's very few students, right? I mean, very few students need that much, that many years of services. For those that do, they're largely working on sort of like transitional adult services. These are kids with needs to learn functional skills, and we have one of our specialized program, the RISE program, is focused on that. So it's just a few kids really who are actually going until age 22. But if it's needed, determined by the IEP team, then yes, we do serve up until the day they turn 22.
And the RISE program was a program I think is now third year.
Well, yes, third year. Yep.
Yep. So it was on the heels of returning from the pandemic that these changes happened, and we established the RISE program, which is housed at Deering, and somewhat, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Jesse, because there are some students maybe from the FLS program at Deering in high school that are the students who may stay on in the construct of the RISE program.
That's right. By and large, that would be the profile of a student who would need that level of many years of service.
Yeah. Great. Were there any questions? So that's some discussion about kind of child find and screening in general. Were there any questions about the proposed language changes to the policy? And I'm happy to pull it up if that's helpful, but if we don't need to review at that level. Again, the main legislative change is in that first paragraph where it talks about, extending it to the age 22, and the others are just efforts to kind of improve clarity and alignment, as I said. But is there any questions on the proposed policy language changes?
Aaron, maybe it would be helpful to put it up just so
Sure.
you can look at it.
Yep. Joanne, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, Laura?
Thank you. The question I had, there are a couple, basically, no. I mean, basically, it's a clarification. The place of how one refers the student, who can a child be put into or be admitted into the special needs programs without a parent approving, or can that happen? That was a question I had in process. And the other thing is, hasn't this always been at public expense? I noticed that one piece right there those are my two thoughts right now.
Yes to the latter. Yes, it always has been a public expense. That's, again, just like clarity. And in terms of the parent, are you asking, like, in the in the event of a student who's in foster care or something like that, or without the parent's consent? And Jesse can speak to kind of the procedural safeguards that require kind of parent involvement and consent. So certainly a student cannot have an IEP, an individual education plan, without parent consent. They can deny services. And then there are structures, in terms of foster care and things like that through the state, where if necessary, there can be folks who are acting kind of, as a, not formally as a guardian, I wouldn't use that, but as a ward. There's structures within both, the foster program and so forth, where there's kind of state programs where folks who can come in and act in that role potentially if that's what's necessary. I don't know.
Thank you.
So again, here you just see the top paragraph, the update to age 22 is the main one. And then the other, is just in, I don't know, Jesse, maybe if you want to say anything just about kind of our relationship and how we work with private schools within the city as it relates to special education services. I don't know if,
Yeah, I mean, right. So it works differently when you're talking about, and we don't mean special purpose private schools that are designed to serve students with significant needs. We mean like private schools like Breakwater, Waynfleet. So we are responsible for any students who attend a private school that is in Portland, even if that student does not live in Portland, right? So they could be being sent to Waynfleet from Scarborough or something, and we are responsible. But our FAPE responsibilities look very different than they do for students in our public schools. They're a very sort of finite set of responsibilities that we have. We provide, we sort of are given a small amount of our federal grant money that we must set aside for it. And we provide some services to those students and some case management of their needs and supporting those schools. So it's very different than what we do in public school, but it is an obligation that we have in the district. Every district has.
Yep. I think it's Ms. Bondo, and then
yes. So my question was also related to the private school when you mentioned. I know it may be difficult for now. Just roughly, the way we've been applying those policy with those specific private school, do we know roughly how many students we have served so far coming from those private school, but here in Portland?
Yeah, I mean, roughly right now, there's about 75 total students that we are serving this way.
Okay. Right. So when you say we are because it's the public expenses, that mean everything is under I try just to see about the cost related, because when is from the private school. So do we have any reimbursement or so everything is all the costs just stay in the public school system?
Yeah, well, again, though, it's we receive the federal grant money,
exactly,
and the state, basically what happens is the state they look at how many of the kids there are, and they tell us exactly how much money we need to spend to serve these kids. So so again, totally different than our normal FAPE obligation, and we spend that money to evaluate these students and provide consultation to the schools, provide maybe some services, and that's what we do within the bounds of what we're required to do by the state. Okay. But it's not like a typical IEP that you would see in a public school, which could have many different services, many different levels of need. It's very set in terms of what our obligations are. But yes, it does come from our funding.
All right. So yeah, just going a little deeper. Further, I try to see on the funding coming from for the federal funding, without knowing exactly how many students we're going to serve. Do we have any, less money coming from them? So we have served a little more students for the year, and we've been receiving less money for the federal, or the money that we're receiving for the federal under that policy is stable. It's just a constant, or we have some up and down. So how we do report it. So how the process goes, because that's the first time, and roughly how much we've been receiving for that specific services.
Yeah. I would say that it does fluctuate a little bit.
Okay.
But the amount we receive in that federal grant has stayed very similar for a number of years now. So they're not big changes.
Okay.
And again, we get the grant and then we're told, here's how much money you have to spend to serve these students, this group of students in the private schools.
Okay.
And so it's a percentage of that based on their calculation, but it stays, it's very similar year to year. So at this point for a number of years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. I saw some other hands there.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe Julianne and then.
Well, Nyla wants to go first because she hasn't asked anything. I can ask after her.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was gonna let you go, but that's fine. I was just gonna ask, are there criterias for like figuring out who, like, how do y'all decide who gets to stay in Portland Public Schools and then who gets to be referred to different programs, or are they already in those programs and then you locate them? Does that question make sense?
Are you Nellie, are you talking about private schools?
Yeah. Like when you find those folks and you're sorry, I'm trying to look for the right word. So when you're doing this process, like how are you figuring out who gets to stay within the system, or like what is that process?
So, I'm sorry, and I was just going to clarify that the students in private schools, when we say that they're parentally placed, they're being sent there by their parents. So we're not.
Oh, okay.
These are parents who have chosen to send their child to the school. And again, it's because the school is physically in Portland. So they've chosen to send their child there, and therefore we have this obligation to them. Okay. But we don't send students to private schools.
Yeah. And it's different. There's a different group of private schools. So that's, as Jesse said, this is kind of like, the Breakwaters, the Waynfleet, St. Bridget, Levy Day School. Chevrolet, right? Yeah. So that's that where parents are choosing to enroll their kids in that school, right? Your question, I didn't know if it was also there, obviously, other special purpose private schools for students with significant disabilities. And so there is, through the IEP process, and that's not, part of the scope of this policy, or really the referral policy that we'll look at, but through the IEP team processes over the years, they make determinations about what's referred to as kind of the least restrictive environment for them. And so at times, depending on the level of need for the student, the team may make a determination that we're not able to provide the right kind of resources and supports for them to be able to access education. And so thus need to be referred to one of these special purpose private schools that typically are not in Portland. I don't know that we actually have any in Portland. So that's a different kind of branch of this work than this initial just kind of screening child find obligation.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Julia.
Thanks. I guess when it's kind of a follow-up to Mickey's question and something of what Nylette was talking about, we provide screening assessment for students in private schools. That is paid completely with federal funding. And if we have 5 students we get enough money for 5. If we have 105, we get enough money for 105 students.
Yeah, that essentially, yes, that's right. And it's
after they've been identified and their situation clearly assessed. What kinds of other services might we provide and it could be the Waynfleets and it could be the Cheveres's, but it could also, I'm also thinking about, as it says in here, the jails. I've had a student who's incarcerated, and I would send him lessons. But if we have a student that then ends up in Long Creek, do they take over that process, or do we continue to? I mean, we might monitor it, but do we continue to provide services?
Yeah. Well, I would say those two situations are,
Yeah.
quite different. The private school situation is unique because even the FAPE responsibility is different. But there, we, again, based on the funding that we're given for it, we provide very limited services, consultation, and some speech services for the younger students in private schools. In like law, if students are incarcerated, then there is there's different things depending on how long they're going to be, incarcerated, et cetera. But yes, in what happens is that the facility will take over sort of the education of the student, and in sort of a collaboration with us. And then when the student is going to be discharged, we'll bring them back to school. But there is a sort of separate programming at the facility for those students.
Yep. At Long Creek, there's actually a school, the A.R. Gould School, right, where students are unenrolled from PPS and enrolled there. And so they're responsible for everything. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Tim, before you ask your question, I just have a little bit of breaking news. School's canceled.
Woo! I don't get snow days anymore. I always have snow days now. It's
so
good.
Communication will follow here shortly. But
all right. Well, I'm glad they decided that.
Tim, what's your question?
You're muted.
Right below where you are on the doc, Aaron, there's a red underline section at the bottom there that says the school unit provides within 30 days. And maybe it's because I have a relatively limited scope of experience here in Portland, but I, as a teacher in middle school, have never seen this in action. And I wonder why the 30-day window was put there and what it was like before this. And whether that 30 days happens at all levels up to age 22, or I guess up to, whatever age kids are in schools right now, and what that's like for kids who aren't in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Well, and Tim, you can let me know if I'm not answering the question you're trying to ask here. But so when the first 30 days piece applies to students who are like incoming kindergartners, right? Okay. Because they haven't been in the schools before. So for students who have already been in our schools, we're not doing the screening for every student, just for those kindergartners. The other 30-day thing is for students who are new to the school. And I think Aaron, you spoke a bit to that earlier about, older students who are entering our system for the first time and some of the kinds of things that we would do.
Yeah, I guess that's...
Is that not what you're getting at?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm curious about, is for students who, transfer into the school from out of the country, what are we obtaining data on a child who comes from another country through multiple measures and direct assessment and parent information? Are we doing that for every kid within 30 days? Like, is that what this is saying Child Find is at all grade levels?
Yeah. Yes, that is what the policy is saying. I was sorry, I'm forgetting I'm sharing my screen. I was just going back to the original draft of the policy. Just checking the language about that, because my understanding was this was just written to kind of be clearer as opposed to a new expectation in terms of the 30 days. But in terms of the practically speaking, one of the challenges is we have these very specific screening tools that get used as part of the early childhood screening stuff that we've been talking about, and the same kind of thing doesn't apply. So it usually gets captured within our similar, and the 30 days, I think, is the challenging part, and really knowing at that point whether, there's an indication, but, it would then kind of flow to our kind of RTI or student success team referral processes to continue kind of the evaluation and so forth. So it's not, we don't have the same set of tools as part of the challenge there, but, it should be, upon a student's entry, if there are, kind of needs being identified, there are multiple measures and those kinds of things, and all the receptive and expressive language skills, all these kinds of things that are part of those early childhood screening, that isn't the same, certainly for students entering at 6th grade or those kinds of things. So they get folded into some of our other systems.
Sure. Thank you.
Julianne, maybe we'll take this question and then let's just do a process check, just recognizing we're, halfway through the meeting. So go ahead, Julianne.
You're muted.
Darn. Thank you. It's a follow-up to Tim's question comment. So it's a 30-day child find process, but that does not mean that they're necessarily going to be tested in that 30-day? Or does this say it must be tested in the 30-day? I guess because I say this sometimes, there's something in, again, I read it over quickly, not very thoroughly, the comment that going through regular ed process, I wasn't quite, do they have to, does a child coming in say 3rd grade, parents, and you have to wait 3 weeks to figure out whether or not they actually should be tested, or they can discern that quickly, or will it be a 30-day wait? I guess those are the questions I'm trying to get at, and I'm not sure I'm being all clear. So I apologize, Jesse and Aaron.
Okay. And this is a good segue somewhat, to take us into the next policy, which talks about referral and intervention. So this will be a good jumping off point. But correct me if I'm wrong in, Jesse, and kind of the language, it doesn't mean that they will be tested in 30 days, but just that we've done some initial screening that they may need to enter the process for referral. And so in the next policy, we'll talk about some of those timelines. The procedure lays out the timelines around when kind of the various steps of a referral process, and there are specific timeframes within it. So this 30 days is not connected to they must be assessed for special education within 30 days. It means we should assess whether maybe they should enter the referral process within 30 days.
Thank you.
Is that an accurate framing, Jesse?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
So maybe just before we move on to the other one, if there aren't any more questions about the language here, if maybe, Nyla, if you want to kind of facilitate just whether folks are comfortable for approving the proposed changes here and forwarding it to, the board for consideration.
Yeah, happy to do that. Can I get a motion to move this policy to the full board?
I move.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. And it is moved. Or all in favor? Okay.
So make it easy to see people. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Great. I saw all the hands at some point there.
Yep, I think you got all.
Okay, great. So let's jump to the other one, because I think these questions, naturally are flowing like, okay, and that was part of why we presented it this way. Okay, we have child find, like, okay, who's out there that we're concerned about, essentially, right? That might need referral. And then what are our kind of systems, and like, how does the process of referral work? So that's the next policy. So let me jump back to our just a couple of slides. So here, this is policy at IHBAA, special education referral and use of general ed interventions. So a little bit of background, this is, the importance of kind of having strong systems of intervention, kind of response to intervention, or multi-tiered systems of support. There's, different ways that it gets talked about, more acronyms and such. And I'll give a little bit of example of that, and that's something that exists in some form in every school. Certainly, an area in some places to strengthen, some places have some strong practices to that end. But the general premise is we want to exhaust, both for the student and the family primarily, right? That it is not an issue of disability, but just needing to provide additional kinds of supports, right? Before we make the referral to special education. That's a significant moment, for a student to be identified in that way, and so want to have exhausted kind of our general ed intervention. So that's kind of the premise, right? Is ensuring students have kind of that full access. Then, there's a whole set, and, as we look, talk about the procedure, Jesse can speak to this a little bit, of kind of what the, steps in the referral process are. And there are very strict kind of timelines associated with that, so that are governed by kind of state and federal law in terms of the special education process. So in the context of the policy and procedure, and just the same notations as before, the substantive change is really, the legislative change extending to age 22, as we've spoken about, and the others, while we were in the policies, work to just kind of clarify the language within them and align them to the child find policy and the other one in particular locations. So those are the main, kind of policy and procedure updates that we're proposing in these policies. Before I turn over to Jesse to talk about kind of referral timelines and process, and we added as an artifact here, to the board docs here, some of the kind of information about the steps in the referral process and like how you go about making a referral. But here is an example of, and this is obviously complicated, but, response to intervention is complicated. We're trying to zero in on what is it a student needs to be able to be successful. And so, I'll just mark a few things here. We don't need to kind of absorb all of this, but just so you had some sense, right? It kind of starts at the tier 1 with, somebody identifying a student of concern. There can be a variety of steps there that are kind of referred to. And here you'll see, and this has been kind of built out over the past couple of years, some of these flags. It's a little hard to see because it's in yellow, but that is like an RTI checklist for English learners and dual language learners. So these are some of the pieces that we've built out to be, more effective in trying to diagnose, what a student's issue is, particularly, if they're also learning English at the same time. So there's tier 1, and if it's unsuccessful, you kind of intensify the interventions is the premise, right? So there's kind of, depending on the school and structure, there's more intensive kind of tier 2 interventions. Again, considerations of trying to make distinctions between language needs versus potential disabilities. Again, we're trying to just have a student be successful. These are generally kind of time bound. So you can see like, okay, you're trying to implement an intervention for a period of time. And then if it's unsuccessful, intensifying that. And so move to tier 3, kind of more intensive interventions. And then if they're unsuccessful, that's at the point where, it's not required, but that the team might be, considering a referral to special education. So, here, in best practice, we're communicating frequently with families throughout that process. So that if we get to that point, of referral to special education, we're doing that, kind of collaboratively or together. So that's just a little bit about kind of RTI processes. Mickey, do you want to ask a quick question here? And then Jesse, I'll invite you to speak about the referral.
Yeah. Thank you. Aaron, you just mentioned it, because when I look at the tiers here, I just don't see any parents' involvement here or intervention. So I think I have no idea if something is really missing here. When exactly the parents are aware about what's going on, because this is really important. When the teacher identifies the student of concern, and I wonder about the student check. So I try to understand. Let's just give an example. 3, 4, or 5, I have no idea the age. on that student, on that child. So what kind of conversation, observation, the teacher is going to talk with that child without having the parents who really aware about what's going on with the child, or maybe they may know about the observation. So I just to see the intersection between what the teacher discover and why the parents are not involved to that tier structure.
One thing I'll say, is, the guidance here, these little blue stars are indications of when parents, minimally when parents should be notified. So, as you can see kind of early on in this process, if communication hasn't happened, right? And, in lots of cases that communication is already happening, but minimally at that point, if a teacher is identifying a student of concern, and, considering a referral to their student success team or RTI team, whatever it's called at a school, they should be informing parents. So that conversation should happen on that front end as it's starting to be elevated. And then, these blue stars are certainly throughout the process, continuing to communicate and engage with the families about the student success and how they're progressing. So just in terms of expectations around communication, it should be early, and should be often throughout the process. And this is a process that may exist in elementary schools, middle schools, and even high schools. So it's not specific to any kind of grade level. And certainly the kind of check-in you might have would obviously be very different, with a first grader, but just kind of trying to find out from them the spirit of it, right? And the conversation would look different depending on the age of the student and, their what's going on with the student. But, as to both the teachers identifying a concern and the notion of a student check-in is to check in with them and help try and get their perspective on what may or may not be the challenges or issues, because that can help to inform what kind of interventions might be successful. Certainly that's going to look very different with a first grader than it would with a sixth grader that Tim might have, or a high schooler. But, it's to just have that as kind of like a, discussion and dialogue.
Okay, thank you.
And somebody else have their hand up here real
Yes,
quick.
my question has to do with the term intervention. It's because we've been talking about it in the budget process. And so in my mind, I'm trying to compare that interventionist with the tier 2 individuals. Are those the individuals in math and reading, or particularly in reading, are those considered tier 1, or are they considered tier 2? Or
No,
are they different ball game?
Tier 1 is typically interventions that are happening within the context of the classroom.
That's what I thought, but
Yeah. So the interventionists that we've been talking about in the budget system, budget dialogue, will exist more in the tier 2, tier 3 level in terms of where they're providing services.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So Jesse, do you want to speak a little bit to the referral process? I can bring up that artifact if it's helpful to use that to kind of speak to.
Yeah, sure, that one would be helpful. So I certainly won't take us through this entire document, but just to kind of give a brief overview of the process, right? So we typically look at it in kind of 2 categories, and that's if a referral to special education is coming from the school team, and then also, of course, a referral can be made by a parent, or the responsible party for the student, if it's not a parent. So we obviously have expectations around RTI before a referral happens from a school team to to determine if the student could be supported without the need for referral to special education. So when a referral is made, the team would complete our our referral form, which collects a large amount of information about the student for the team to review, and I'll talk about that process in a second. I mentioned also, of course, parents have the right to refer as well. When there's a referral, a parent referral that takes place, the team is obligated to meet within 15 days to discuss that. And so we have basically sort of a two-step process once a referral is submitted, right? So the first meeting is called the step one meeting. And in that meeting, the goal of that meeting is to determine if it is necessary to evaluate the student. So if a parent refers, within 15 days, you have that step one meeting to discuss and determine if you need to evaluate the student. In some cases, it's determined a student we don't need to evaluate right now. And so that's where the process stops, at least for that time. But other cases, of course, we decide to evaluate. We determine what evaluations are going to be done. And then at that point, the district has 45 days 45 school days to conduct the evaluation. So those are conducted mostly by school psychologists. There can also be evaluations done, of course, by experts like speech providers, if it's something that the team determines is needed. Occupational therapists, again, the team determines what evaluations are needed. And then within 45 days, the team comes back together for what we call the step two meeting. They review those evaluations and they make a determination in that meeting if the student is eligible for special education services. And again, in some cases, the student is not found eligible. So that's where the process ends there. If they're found eligible, the team develops the IEP, and we have 30 days to get that IEP into place, if that's what happens. So again, there's a lot more detail in this document, and people are welcome to of course review it and ask questions about it. But that's, I think, what I just shared is sort of a high level overview of what that process looks like, and some of those key deadlines that Aaron referenced for having different meetings and getting different pieces done.
Member Ali?
Yes, I just have like a really I guess zoomed out question, and just trying to understand what constitutes or a student needing like referral to evaluation. Is it disability, or does that include, like, what does that include? Is it ADHD? I don't know if that's if that's classified as a disability. Is it like a reading disability, or higher need disability? What does that look like?
No, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think, there's, when it comes to eligibility for special education, there's 13 categories that are identified, sort of official categories that are designated by the, federal legislation around if a student has a disability in one of these categories, or I should put it another way, a student must have a disability that falls into one of those categories to be eligible for special education. That's just one of two pieces, though, right? So there's the disability, and then there's the question of, is the disability impacting them to the extent that they require these special services to be able to access their learning in the curriculum? So the team, when the team determines the student's eligible, they're not only determining if they need the disability, but also the impact of the disability. And so a student gets referred when there's concerns or suspicions that a student has a disability, or maybe they already have a disability, but there's the impact of it is extensive. Those are when a team or a parent would refer. And the goal of the process is to go through a specific process to look at that, assess it, and determine if in fact the student requires the services.
Okay.
But it could be any. There's a wide range of things that even within those 13 categories that I mentioned, some of them have many things within them. So there's many different, obviously, types of needs that we meet with special education services.
Thank you. I know there are some like cultural, how do you say, reactions to sending a child to like getting evaluated, or not labeling, but like a child deemed eligible for special education. Have those conversations been had, and how did anyone in this process navigate those difficult conversations, and not only helping the student navigate this difficult process, but getting the parent on board?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we well, I guess there are a couple pieces to it. So one is that, I should have mentioned it because it came up. Someone asked about this earlier, but we must get parental consent to evaluate students. So in other words, regardless of what the team determines, we must get parental consent to evaluate. And then if the process plays out such that the student is eligible for services and we get an IEP, we must get parental consent for that as well. So that piece is built into the process. I just wanted to clarify that. We work pretty extensively with Maureen Clancy and her team to really make sure that when we have meetings with families, that there are, robust conversations about what this is about, what it is, what it isn't, what the concerns are that are being brought forward, how we're going to be supporting the student and framing it in a way that is accurate and also feels, I think, supportive, which is what is intended to be. The purpose of the services are to help students access general education and their learning, and we work, to really make sure that parents understand that and understand exactly what it is going to look like, what's going to happen, and that's really, those are sort of the efforts that we make to mitigate it. But it is, through that process, there is a lot of conversation, designed to support that. But again, we, parent buy-in is a must, both like legally and also from it being an effective way to support the student. So that is a huge area of focus for us, and we do work a lot of work around that.
And just to add just a little bit there, just from the context of just perspective on kind of our family community specialists and kind of their work and kind of where the bulk of their time is spent. And I would say the bulk of their time is actually spent in two places, right? As we think about that team and how they're supporting. One is in conferences. Conferences dominate a lot of time for our parent community specialists. And then the second is within the IEP process, because both, to Jesse's point of like in service of the student and family, right? We would want
Great timing.
I thought you got cut off.
Yeah.
Do you need to go?
maybe. We'll see. It's off now. Dinner's being made downstairs. So I was saying something about anyway, just in IEPs, it's both a legal requirement, right? And that translation's provided, right? But beyond just the legal requirement and able to kind of engage the families, that's part of what happens. To be able to provide translation. But that's the other main time commitment. One of the significant time commitments of our family community specialists is participating in IEP meetings and supporting that process.
Thank you. I'm glad someone is helping parents understand who are not maybe used to discussing these difficult topics, I think.
And they are, and I would say just to that, they are, and certainly there are instances where families refuse evaluation or refuse services. That does happen, and happens across the spectrum, not just with multilingual families for sure. But And I would say just to, the consciousness of, that notion of it as a stigma, that, the importance of, and to the kind of criteria Jesse was naming. This is why the relationship between the general ed intervention process is important, right? Because it's just because a student has a disability doesn't mean they qualify. And just because they have a disability also doesn't mean they qualify. There has to be that gap in terms of being able to successfully access their education, and that it's showing kind of like a negative effect. So one of the ways you're able to kind of tease that out is by increasing the level of just kind of general ed interventions. And so if that's able to resolve the student's issue, then that's great, right? We're done. We've helped the student be successful, right? And we're all moving forward. And so it's just, I think your question points out the relationship of those issues, or, those processes in a way. All right. Let's see. Maybe we can go to the policy and procedure language for a moment, just to see if there's any questions there about the policy and procedure language. So I'll call that up here for a second. If there are any more kind of general questions about the referral processes. So again, here in the top paragraph, is that legislative kind of change to under the, to under the age of 22, right? And then, this is where we have some kind of language that we're using across the policies about kind of who has authority to make referrals, and the distinctions between referrals that are made by a parent or a legal guardian or so forth, or agency representative. That's a good language for, I think, Julianne, your question earlier, of where we have some folks acting on behalf of children. And then, things that may happen within the school, from the professional school staff. So that's the language there in that policy. Go ahead, Julianne.
But isn't the other individuals or agencies eliminated? Is that correct?
It's just, I think it's moved up here into this paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm trying to keep there.
Yep. So this was, this is a good example of just trying, once the red lines are resolved, there'll be a short paragraph about parent, legal guardian, et cetera, right, in their process versus the professional school staff, as opposed to all being in one. So these are just some of the things that once the red lines are adopted, we hope that it'll be clearer. Okay, I'll call up the procedure and we can kind of scroll through that just to see if that prompts any questions, and then kind of take a motion on these. So again, this is kind of more detailed. The substantive legislative update is again here at the top. As you can see, in terms of our what we're trying to accomplish with the proposed changes here of kind of consistent language across child find and these referral policies and procedures. So you can see that similar language that was in the child find policy here. It speaks to the language around referrals by parents. And then again, the process in terms of referrals by staff. The referral by others, right, is kind of incorporated now with that language that Julianne, you were just asking about in this same paragraph with parents, because it plays out in a similar fashion. Then this starts to get into what Jesse was speaking to in terms of the timelines associated. So like how a referral is formalized, right? And then the kind of timeline for processing it. So this is where the first window of the 15 days to get the consent to evaluate, and then 45 days to complete the evaluations. and then holding an IEP meeting within 30 days from there. So these are some of the important kind of benchmarks that are, in the initial referral process. What else do we have? There's some language here, not much changed about just when students are coming in from other schools and what should be there, right? And kind of how we interact depending on where they may or may not be in the referral process at that time when they're entering the school, or whether they've had an IEP and how that gets managed. And then just a little bit of language about the, general education intervention process that we've been speaking about. I think that is, that's kind of the substance of the changes. So any questions here on this procedure? Okay. Bring it down. Okay. So if no questions there, I think then we'd be ready to kind of take a motion to refer, this policy and the related procedure as well to kind of the full board for consideration.
Thank you, Aaron. Can I get a motion to,
I will move that.
sorry, Yusra has her hand up. Do you have a question, Yusra?
Oh, no, sorry, I was moving.
We're both moving.
Okay, we're speed moving. We're speed moving through this process.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, you do it.
Okay, I'm just gonna redo it because I lost track of what I was doing. Can I get a motion to move this policy and its procedures to the full board? Does anybody want to give me a motion?
Yusra does.
Okay, Yusra, thank you.
I'll second it.
Can I get us? Okay.
Got it.
All in favor of this motion moving to the full board? All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, wonderful. So, Chair Lentz will work together with Ryan, right, to figure out, recognizing where we are and, appreciate everybody's time tonight and flexibility. Thank you very much. I can tell you a story about a polar plunge to celebrate my wife's birthday at a separate point.
Wow.
Last week, but so appreciate everybody's consideration to move. I know it's a busy week. We'll figure out the right timing, just knowing the kind of, schedule we have with the budget stuff. Because I do think this one, while the policy changes aren't super substantive, this as well, just some of these details about child find and referral, I think, would be a useful workshop discussion with the full board. So we'll figure out the right timing to kind of bring these forward move forward from there. All right.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Jesse.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and then you can adjourn. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 1st at 5:30 p.m. So that's currently our current schedule. And we have kind of two facilities related policies that we'll be looking at that have some required updates. One's the emergency management plan and that policy, and then the pest management policy. So going in a very different direction.
Yeah. Interesting. Definitely interesting. Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Can I get a second? Thank you, Yusra. The Policy and Curriculum Committee has adjourned on Wednesday, April 3rd at 7:18.
Good night.
Thank you.